You know that moment when
Another
your
invite?
phone buzzes with another invitation, and instead of excitement, you feel this quiet resistance? Like you'd honestly rather stay home, sit in your own space, maybe scroll a little, maybe stare at nothing in particular, and just exist for a while. It's not dramatic, it's not something you can easily explain to someone else, it just feels easier to stay in. And for a long time, you might have wondered if that means something is wrong, like maybe you're becoming too withdrawn or missing out on something important, or slowly disconnecting from the world without realizing it. But psychology suggests something very different is happening beneath that feeling. What makes this fascinating is that psychologists have been quietly observing this pattern for years, and it rarely begins as a dislike for people or social life. It usually starts in a much softer, almost invisible way. A preference for calm over noise, for depth over constant stimulation, for environments where you don't have to think about how you're being perceived every second. And over time, that small preference begins to grow into something more consistent, something that shapes your decisions in subtle ways. You don't wake up one day and decide you love staying at home. It slowly becomes the place where you feel most like yourself. Now, to really understand this, we need to separate two experiences that people constantly confuse. There's isolation, which feels heavy, like something is missing, like you're disconnected in a way that doesn't sit right with you. And then there's intentional solitude, which feels completely different. It feels like relief, like stepping out of something overwhelming and finally being able to breathe again. From the outside, they can look exactly the same. Someone sitting at home alone, doing their own thing. But internally, the experience couldn't be more different. One drains you, the other restores you. And this is where things start to get psychologically interesting, because people who love staying at home aren't always avoiding the world. In many cases, they're managing something that most people don't even notice: mental load. Think about how your mind operates when you're out in social environments. You're constantly reading expressions, adjusting your tone, choosing your words carefully, responding at the right moment, interpreting subtle cues that nobody explicitly points out. It's a continuous process running in the background even when you're not aware of it. And your brain doesn't just switch that off. So when you finally stay home, something shifts in a way that's hard to explain but easy to feel. The pressure disappears. You don't have to perform. You don't have to interpret what someone meant by a certain look or tone. You don't have to keep up with the rhythm of interaction or fill silence with words. You can just exist without being observed or evaluated. And that creates a completely different kind of mental space, one that feels quieter, lighter, and more stable than anything you experience outside. If this is resonating with you, you might enjoy exploring more psychology like this. Subscribing helps this kind of content reach people who feel these things but don't always have the words to explain them. People who quietly think they're the only ones experiencing this shift in preference. Here's the part most people overlook. The preference for staying at home isn't always about comfort in the way people assume. It's often about recovery. Because when your brain processes experiences deeply, it uses more energy than it appears on the surface. Conversations aren't just conversations. They become layers of meaning, tone, timing, and context. You replay moments, you analyze reactions, you notice what wasn't said just as much as what was. And all of that adds up quietly in the background, building a kind of invisible weight. And this is where it becomes a bit counterintuitive. The more aware you are of your environment, the more draining that environment can feel. Not because there's something wrong with it, but because it's full of signals, expectations, interactions, and subtle pressures that most people filter out without thinking. But if your mind naturally takes in more of that information, it doesn't filter it out easily. It holds on to it, processes it, and eventually needs somewhere to release it. So when you choose to stay home, it isn't laziness or avoidance in the way people sometimes assume. It's regulation. You're lowering the volume of everything your mind has been absorbing. You're stepping out of a space where your attention is constantly being pulled in different directions and into one where nothing new is being added. And in that stillness, your thoughts begin to settle. Your breathing slows. Your mind starts to reorganize itself without pressure. Now, here's something that often surprises people. Those who genuinely enjoy staying at home aren't necessarily lacking social ability. In fact, many of them are highly aware of emotions, both their own and other people's. They pick up on subtle shifts in tone, small changes in energy, unspoken tension in conversations that others might completely miss. And because of that, when they do engage socially, they tend to be deeply present, fully tuned in to the interaction. But that level of awareness and presence comes with a cost, and that cost is energy. This leads to another layer that people don't always talk about. It's not that you want less connection, it's that you want a different kind of connection. Fewer people, but deeper conversations. Less noise, but more meaning. Less performance, but more authenticity. It's not about rejecting people or pushing them away. It's about choosing interactions that don't feel overwhelming or surface level. Interactions where you don't have to pretend, where you don't have to keep up a version of yourself that doesn't feel completely real. And this is where things become even more interesting. Over time, your mind starts to associate home not just with comfort, but with clarity. It becomes the place where your thoughts make sense again, where your emotions aren't competing with external input, where you can process things at your own pace without interruption. And once your brain makes that connection, it starts to prefer it, not because the outside world is bad, but because home is where everything finally feels aligned. So if staying at home feels natural to you, it may not be a bad habit or something you need to fix. It may simply be your mind choosing what aligns with how it functions best. A slower rhythm, a quieter environment, a space where you don't have to constantly adapt to external expectations, a place where you can exist without feeling like you're being pulled in multiple directions at once. At the same time, psychology does make an important distinction here, and this part matters. There is a difference between choosing solitude and slowly drifting into disconnection. When staying at home feels peaceful, restorative, and grounding, that's one experience. But when it begins to feel heavy, empty, or isolating, that's something else entirely. And the difference isn't always obvious at first. It's subtle. It shows up in how you feel afterward, whether you feel recharged or whether you feel like something is missing. So the real question isn't how often you go out or how many plans you accept. It's how you feel within your current rhythm. Do you feel calm in your own space, or do you feel cut off from something you need? Do you feel restored after time alone, or do you feel like you're slowly withdrawing from connection? Because that internal experience tells you far more about your well-being than any external measure ever could. If this made you see yourself a little more clearly, you can subscribe and continue exploring these patterns. There's a lot more to understand about how the mind quietly shapes the way we live, especially in ways that don't always match what society expects from us. Because in the end, the psychology of people who love staying at home isn't really about staying at home at all. It's about how you process the world, how you manage your energy, and what kind of environment allows you to feel like yourself again. It's about recognizing that not everyone thrives in constant motion, constant noise, constant interaction. Some people need space, not because they're broken, but because that's where their mind works best. And once you begin to understand that, something shifts in how you see yourself. You stop forcing yourself into environments that drain you just because you think you're supposed to enjoy them. You stop comparing your rhythm to people who are energized by things that exhaust you. And instead, you start paying attention to what actually restores you, what actually brings you back to a sense of balance. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not a complete change, not a dramatic transformation, just a quiet understanding of how you work. Because once you see that pattern clearly, you start noticing it everywhere. in the relief of canceled plans, in the calm that settles in when the noise fades, in the quiet moments where nothing is happening but everything feels okay. And maybe that's the part people don't talk about enough. Not all peace looks exciting. Not all fulfillment looks social. Sometimes it looks like a quiet room, a familiar space, and the absence of everything that usually asks something from you. And once you understand that, you stop questioning it. You just begin to accept it. And that acceptance can feel like finally coming home.